He's put a time limit on it. If it was up to me, I wouldn't get very tall. Thank you.
It's already recording, so you're good.
No, but you still look the same though. You still look like pretty, you know? Yeah, you know. Yeah, I know. That's what I said.
There's a lot of information that was just thrown at you, so we'll be sure to stick around for questions afterwards. But we're going to move a little bit quicker, and hopefully it's a little bit more interesting in the second half, where we're talking about specific schools, so you can see like numbers and everything else. So first off, there are 3 types. So if you're applying to Canadian schools, there's a thing called the OMSAS. So it's just the application service. From what I've seen, generally speaking, Canadian schools don't take a lot of international students, but you know, it's an option. For the U.S., there's 3 types. So there's AMCAS, the American Medical College Application Service. There's TDAS, which is for Texas schools specifically, so they have their own system. And then for osteopath, so those 2 are MD, and then for DO, which is osteopathic medicine, there's a thing called ACOMAS. So that's that. So there are 3 types of application services for schools in the United States. So where to apply? So there are different programs that you can go towards. There's early EDP, which stands for Early Decision Program. So if I'm not mistaken, you pick one school to designate as EDP, and you'll find out early, like in October or something, if you get into that school. And then if not, then you can apply to other schools. But if you get in, you're locked to go into that school. I haven't heard of too many people doing EDP.
So you can round it up by October 1st. If you have great stats, so you can consider that you will be, if you don't get into the school that you're going to, your application will be linked to all the other schools you apply to, if you choose to move forward. Then you have the regular MD, dual degree programs, MD, PhD, and then you have your master's degrees, MD, master's and MD degree. So you just really want to find out what you're interested in, because it's going to determine how you apply, which parts of the applications you apply to, and helps you plan for the application cycle.
So you know how like there's a separate application for
Texas, yeah.
Yeah, is that like, is there like a reason for that?
So they just have, it's like, you know, like UCs when you're applying to college, they have like their own separate application versus like common application for all the other like IVs and private schools. It's kind of the same idea.
So do they favor Texan residents?
Yeah, so the Texas schools, generally speaking, are more in-state heavy. So yeah, they generally speaking do.
The ones in the bigger cities will have better numbers for upscale.
Yeah, like Baylor or like UT's, the one at Texas. Sorry, the one at Dallas.
You know, the one thing you have to decide is how many schools you're going to apply to. So, these are roughly, corresponding. There are nuances really between your stats and how many schools you're going to be applying to.
So generally speaking, just average, and again, we'll pull up the numbers so you see exactly where the numbers lay. But generally speaking, the average MCAT for the old score, or the old scale, was about 31, 32, and for GPA it's about 37.5, 37. And so strong applicants, 38, 39 with a mid-30s MCAT, generally speaking. So you want to apply to 10 or 20. If you're average, so if you're right around that mark, then 20 or 30. And then if you're below, if one of those, because they look at both. So if you may have a 3.8 GPA, but if your MCAT's like a 27 or 28, then that'd be considered a lower score. So then you want to apply to more schools.
So just a small thing to consider in looking at this, because you might not know what strong means, but it really this also depends on what schools you apply to. So if you have if you're a strong applicant and you apply to the best schools, you're going to be an average applicant in terms of competition. If you're applying with either a low MCAT or low grades and you apply to the top, you're going to be a super non-competitive applicant. We'll say the category you apply to.
So generally speaking, be strategic. Be very strategic when you're applying. Don't focus only on the Hopkins, the Harvard, UCSF, like all the top name schools necessarily. I mean, feel free to apply to those, but also be strategic. Make sure you have a good number of target schools. Make sure you have a good number of safety schools as well, based on where your numbers stand. So don't just, like, I mean, I've had people who have stellar scores, 3.95 GPAs, 40 MCAT, and they only applied to like the top 20 schools and got like 2 interviews. I mean, you're limiting yourself by only applying to the top tier schools. So make sure you have a good number of target and safety schools as well, based on where you stand.
So yeah, metrics are very important to consider, looking at your own stats and then looking at what the school actually takes in and what their average applicant has. So some good resources to get those metrics, key to helping you determine what are your target schools, your safety schools and REIT schools is getting the AMSAR. That's given administered through the AAMC or other books. One extra one I'm using, and I don't know how great it is compared to other books, but is the Princeton Review 168 Best Medical Schools. They give some data on acceptances, AMSAR doesn't. So different pieces of information fill in different gaps to really help you determine what the stat line is for a school.
So I would say that AMSAR is the standard. You should definitely apply, get that. It's $25. So just keep that in mind. And sometimes there are discount codes like 10% off, 50% off. So, but generally speaking, it's about $25. It's pretty extensive in what they provide, and it's pretty valuable in terms of the average MCAT score at every school, and they break down what the average bio section, what the average physical science section, what the average verbal section is. And then they also break down your science GPA and your overall GPA, what the averages are for each school. They also tell you how many people apply to each school, how many people interviewed, and how many people matriculated. So they don't tell you how many people got accepted, but they tell you how many people ended up going to that school in state versus out of state, which is pretty helpful in my opinion. They also usually tell you a mission statement. So this is a specific screenshot of it. A school listed on there.
This is like a general information. You want to take a look at the mission statement when you're looking at a school to see if you're the applicant that they accepted your background right now.
Yeah.
So it's a good rule of thumb, like how you're saying like, oh, we have a 3.8 GPA,
right?
And then like a 27.
Right.
So it's like I've heard like people like combining it to like make like a certain number and like
a Lizzie score?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so there's a thing going around called the Lizzie score where you calculate your, you basically just add your GPA to the MCAT, but generally speaking, because you're evaluated on both, if you have one that's going to be lower, it could be a limiting factor too. Like some schools, for instance, even if you have a 4.0 GPA, some schools cut off, the MCAT cutoff for a subsection is 8. So if you have a 7 on your MCAT, even if you, so I had a friend that had like a mid-30 MCAT, so he got like almost 14 or 15 on both bio and physics, but he got like a 6 in verbal. So that cut him out of a lot of schools. So and he had almost a 4.0. So literally just that one score took him out of the running out of a lot of schools. Yeah, you can combine it, but I think it's more accurate to kind of consider both, or always consider both when you're applying.
Yeah, and one thing to check, and they'll have this information, is check, of course, just the ratio of out-of-state applicants to the number of out-of-state interviews to get a number to be able to compare relatively. And if it's, but anything below 5% interviews for out-of-state applicants is pretty low. So it's rule of thumb, it's lower than 5%. These are the percentiles for GPA and for MCAT scores. So the ones, everything in gray, light gray are the 10th percentiles. So that's the range, and this is for UCI. The median is 3.8. That's what you usually want to get to be pretty competitive.
Yeah, so like a target school, you should be about the school median, around there.
So, and same goes for MCAT total, and then the individual scores for each section of the MCAT exam. So on the older scale, for verbal reasoning, that between 8, 9, and 10 percentile. And you don't want to base your numbers, your own personal numbers, and compare it only, compare it to the 10 percentile to see if you're competitive. You need to compare it to the median or higher. So this range, the school median
Yeah, so for this, yeah, so what are you talking about the 90 and 10 percentile? So they give you that data. So East Irvine has 104 students in their class. So, but for math, to make things simpler, yeah, you can go to the next slide. To make things simpler, let's just say they had 100 students. That means that less than 10% or less, if you see the number 10 percentile for overall GPA, less than 10% or less of the students in their med school came in with a 3.48 GPA or lower. Their average is, but it's kind of just because some schools have a wide range, some schools have a smaller range, but their median is actually 3.77. So right at that 50% mark is 3.77. And of course, 90 percentile, that's a pretty high number. That's going to be a high number for other schools. So I just, it's hard to use that number, but median and definitely consider 10 percentile and median for both MCAT and GPA. We're going to show you numbers shortly. It's not meant to scare you all, but it's meant to kind of provide what we're looking at realistically for numbers. Because a lot of people can tell you like, oh, you'll be fine with like a 3.5 GPA, or you'll be fine with like a 3.8. But we have the exact numbers to show you what the 50 percentile at every single school is. So just be mindful of that.
So, how do you get to the Excel?
Oh. Okay, so next up is the Excel file.
So this is basically my working list of schools I'm applying to. I'm organizing it based on basically listing out every metric that I have to be able to compare which schools I'm going to be applying to in what order, because when you apply, as we'll talk about very soon, makes a difference. There goes.
Yeah.
So
okay, so let's just pick a random school per se. So pick a random state, someone.
New York.
California.
All right.